Well, I'm here live again with my good friend, the one and only Iran. I was trying to think the other day about how long have we known each other now?
A lot.
A
We have
long
changed
time.
our color of our hair many times since then. So yeah, I think at least kind of almost a decade.
It must be over a decade because I,
Yeah.
I remember, I want to say it was the early Perfecto days when, we were doing some quite incredible stuff. And I think I was talking here, I think in 2015, and I put up the Pokemon Go example that we worked on, right? Which
Yeah.
was adding GPS,
Location-based testing.
location, and it was just mind blown at that point in time, And we're on the second or third book we did together as well.
Yeah. At
So
least two of my four books we partnered together, and thank you again for that, by the way. Yeah. But I can say that even almost after a decade, and I've been speaking yesterday here at Star West.
Yeah.
We still keep hearing more and more of the same challenges in testing. Skill set, lack of time. In the sprint to do testing, complex test automation like Pokemon, right?
Yeah.
How do you automate these complex scenarios? And I know that you're dealing with high technology like AR, VR testing. I was in your session yesterday, but I feel that the gap between the very sophisticated test practitioners and the ones that are still struggling, with what to automate, actually what is even continuous testing to them, is still like a huge gap. There is still a huge gap between these kind of level of practitioners. And that's what I'm also hearing here at Star West. I don't know what you heard over the past 2 days.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think the gap's probably bigger than we think, right? Because for us, it's like we love this stuff, so it's kind of for us, continuous testing is like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And DevOps, all this kind of modern, release if it hurts, do it faster, do it more often. But I think for people who are kind of maybe starting their careers in testing, and I think we keep on coming back to this. I know we kind of covered it yesterday with Joe, is that when you're starting out and you're trying to learn the technology and taking those baby steps. And I think there was a stat that came out, I think it was Diego, who said something like only 21% of organizations have got continuous testing, right? And that's still 1 in 5. It's quite a low number. How do we get that moving a little bit more the other way, right?
And I would argue that even this 21%, it depends also on the vertical, whether it's financial and insurance or healthcare, or media and entertainment. You also see these gaps between the different verticals, which are tasked with different scales requirements, security requirements, and other things, which sometimes are even slowing them down even further to do kind of test automation or continuous testing at scale. So still a long way to go, I think, until people kind of understand and collaborate around test automation and continuous testing.
Yeah.
What I also heard, and maybe it's interesting to discuss, the number of test cases that you kind of drag between one cycle to the next, kind of in a blind way. That was also something that I heard over the past few days at Star West. People have walking scripts. Okay, so yeah, let's pile them on top of new ones and just add them into the CI pipeline and just continue running them just for the sake of it. And continuous testing doesn't mean that you add and build on top of things. You need to evaluate, validate, and exclude things as your product matures. What's your take about it as well?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one because I remember reading, like everyone did in the 90s, I think it was James Barker wrote the test automation snake oil, right?
Yeah.
And there was a quote there around, I think Borland at the time, that's how long ago it was, Borland kind of making a statement saying, once you've run an automation script, what's the value of running another automation, running it again? Because the likelihood of finding something's regressed reduces exponentially. Now, don't get me wrong, we've all seen some edge cases where someone reintroduces a bug or reintroduces something that stops failing.
Yeah.
But there is this kind of, and I think you've just pointed out, death by a million cuts, where you create a stack of automation here, you then create more on top of it, and suddenly you've got 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 scripts which you're all having to maintain, whether they're Appium scripts, Selenium scripts, and then you're fixing them, and you don't know, are you fixing them to make them work, and the requirement actually isn't what is actually, it's an issue, right? And I think there's a massive disconnect between that triangle of what everyone, the testing trifecta of requirement, bug, test, how do we relate that over and over again? And I think it's the basics, which is the problems, right?
And I think you're the master of data, right? Data coming from production, data coming even from your internal resources. And I think it's a very easy solution to what we're just talking about. Look at the test data, look at your reports, see which test cases were of higher value, were able to find bugs, easier to maintain, continuously running with consistent results, right? Always passing or always failing, but it is consistent, and it is consistent across multiple platforms. We earlier talked about mobile, right? Mobile, just today, we're at Southwest, Google just announced the new Pixel 7 and 7 Pro, right? Yep. New devices. So is your previous test cases running the same way they ran on the other Pixels devices on Android 13, which is the new GA, right? So these kind of things, you need to continuously maintain and look at the data, and that's where your solution lies, right? If you look at the data, you look at what you're producing each and every build, obviously you can be smarter for your next sprint. So I'm not saying that regression suites are useless, they are very important, but you need to maintain them as an ongoing practice. And I don't think that everyone is doing the same.
Yeah, and I had this question, and it kind of the island, right, which we're both sat on now, right, is you've got this kind of island technology, which is in the top now of the phone, where you're kind of looking at it and saying, okay, well, is this use case here, you can see it scanning in real time, it's how do developers develop that widget when there's only a small set of 14 Pro Maxes, and then the same thing with, like you said, the Pixel 7s, is the flagship devices end up having unique capabilities that the other devices don't have.
Exactly.
And developers are wanting to develop against things like the Magic Island, right? And they're wanting to say, well, actually, I want my app to then go and dock into it and work seamlessly. And I was literally sat in the iStore the other day, and I showed the guy, and it literally just was coming up with errors on the screen on this always on display. And I was like, and he was like, oh, well, no, just move it up and down, move it in and refresh it, and it'll solve itself. And I'm thinking, is that your technical, viewpoint, that now we've got always on OLED, if it comes up with errors on the screen, just refresh it over with your finger? That doesn't seem like maybe it's been battle hardened enough to actually be able to, to work. So, to me, that's lack of testing, right? And I know you've always been get the devices first in the cloud, right?
Right.
Are you seeing test cases when you put the 14 Pro Maxes into the labs that people were starting to test that kind of capability?
Since it's too new, I don't see that many use cases being tested, which is unfortunate, because I think specifically to this new island, this island is an island with multiple use cases or native features that are running. Let's think about the iTunes or the music player of the iPhone. It runs within this island, and you can expand it. And when you expand it, it kind of overlaps on something that is maybe running in the background. So you definitely need to now reconsider existing scenarios while the island is being used by the end users. Like, if you look at the foldable smartphones from Samsung, right? They allow you now to run three apps in the foreground, which means you can run YouTube, LinkedIn, and I don't know, an email or WhatsApp or whatever application, all in parallel in the foreground. So you have competing on resources, you have applications which might need to kind of work together. And I don't know if developers and testers really are reimagining their test suites with the new investments that Apple and Google are doing. So I think that, by the way, that keeps our jobs quite secured for the future, because new technology always drives new test cases, new methodologies that you need to think about, new labs that you need to build, or test environments that you need to build. So that's really exciting in my mind. It's a challenge, but it's exciting.
And it's interesting. And we both had this conversation yesterday about the fact that I remember launching the first mobile app, right? And so I was on the phone to you guys saying we need to get your guys queuing up in Boston to get a device into the lab, and it was for Domino's, right?
Right.
And it was, we'd been building against the emulator. We'd actually written automated tests. I think we'd written them in Perfecto, and literally it was working. The app was working. We'd kind of been green light to be the first app in the App Store on day one of the launch of this new device, the Apple Watch, which now is on every single person's arm, right?
Right.
And you got it in the lab. We ran the tests, and the app didn't work on the actual real use, the real device, the physical device. It didn't work. It worked on the emulator. It didn't work on the real device. However, we'd already launched it into the App Store. It had already been approved based on, I guess, the emulated version, and it went live. So day one experience was the app launched, and there was a big button that said repeat order, and it didn't work. And so, testing with emulators versus physical devices, completely different thing. But if Apple, want to release, let's say, the Ultra, you need it in the lab. You need to be seeing, well, what happens with the battery drain after 3 days? Does it genuinely last 3 days, or does it last under load with an app?
Oh, yeah.
A few hours, right? And I think that's a really interesting dimension as well, is the battery side of things, the telemetry and the GPS and all that kind of stuff is really important.
And that's what we call kind of real-world conditions, real-world scenarios. Because, and by the way, since then, since these use cases, we decided in Perfecto to support all public betas on iOS, on Android, on real devices, and on virtual devices as well. We all obviously believe in real device testing as being, the real life indication of your quality. But we support public betas and encourage our customers to test earlier just because of this thing, because you don't want to wake up in a GA of a new Pixel 7 with Android 13 GA and you are blind. Android 13 was out like few months ago already as GA. You could have tested it on a Pixel 6 and 6 Pro and 6A, so you could have prepared your app for this Pixel 7 coming out. And I think if you do a prep work ahead of time, obviously you are in a better position. Even with iOS 16, we've seen it with our customers. So
and I think you've hit a really interesting point. iOS 16, we know there are always earlier versions available, right?
Yeah.
But it's always a kept secret about how the new processors are going to work, how the new hardware is going to work, the new 48 megapixel camera. We can test to a certain point with the iOS, but then you also think, well, it's not just the iOS. There's the watch updates, right? There's the CarPlay updates. I genuinely didn't realize until, I was talking earlier about the fact that I've got an old 17-year-old car, which I put in. You liked it on my Facebook for the King's speech, right? The first speech of the King live. And I've got it in a 17-year-old car with CarPlay, right? Yeah. But I didn't realize that CarPlay is inherent features based on the iOS version. Yeah. So there was new iOS 16 CarPlay features, right?
Which the car also needs to kind of do their own firmware updates to support. Yeah, it's all, by the way, that's kind of IoT, and that's everything connected, right? We're looking at everything connected, and if something kind of fails in one of these platforms, as a user, you might be disappointed, but also surprised, because you expect, this transition from an watch, iPhone, Mac, car, Apple home, whatever devices,
iPad Pros,
everything to work, because you're already kind of looking at a continuous session from an end user experience perspective. And when you see that, okay, this is not even, the iPads today aren't yet supporting iOS 16.
No.
It's on iPad OS 15. So you already see this kind of gaps between technologies and platforms, which from an end user perspective, it's weird. From a developers and tester perspective, they need to still support the old ones, because not everyone is catching up with all these new technologies.
And I think you've hit another good point. It's like, as soon as the M1 chip came out, I went out and replaced all my fleet, right? I had the developer kit because I was doing the MIT stuff. Yeah. So I had the Mac Mini, in essence, with the new M1 chip. I had the M1, as soon as the laptop came out, the M1 MacBook Pro. And there's this illusion that, a bit like with Windows 11, they're being able to load at the Android Play Store, in essence, that you would be able to run native mobile app kind of in the same area. And that was all just based on recompiling the actual app to say, do it for Apple TV, do it for Mac OS. And I know it was actually from you that I got that insight around what they're trying to do. Because I'm always sat there with my M1 Mini and my M1 Pro, and the idea is the next year, this is what I've heard, is that they're going to be able to dock it in, and it's going to run the Mac OS. So you're going to switch between iOS in an iPad kind of feature, and then dock it to become a full Mac OS, right? And this in a boot camp landscape feels very logical, right? That this is running the same hardware as the Airs and the Pros are. So why aren't we able to just dock it and become a full machine? And I think this...
And the $1 million question, how are you going to test all these transitions,
Yeah.
right? And just to dovetail to that trend, if you like, you look to that PWAs, right? Progressive Web Applications. Google started it, and then all the other browsers support it, right? Safari and Firefox and Edge, Chrome, everyone supports it. And then you look at Flutter, still.
Yeah,
Google
3.0 actually. Is it?
Yeah, and Flutter today, you build an app on Dart, and you deploy it on Windows, on Mac, on Linux, on iOS, on Android, all browsers. So you have a single code base running on all these things. How are you going to test it, right? With a single script. Okay, so now you have Flutter, you have Appium, kind of trying to join forces to support all these different permutations. So again, it's good because it means that there is advancement in technologies, which also poses some challenges for test engineers and developers. But let's not forget this continuous testing mantra, because this never changes. Continuous testing in a short amount of time never changes. You just need to adapt to the new technologies and make sure that you are maintaining properly your test cases, because they change all the time. So as simple as it sounds,
it's not simple.
It's not simple.
And I'm gonna throw the baseline kind of problem, infinite problem, which I'd like your viewpoint on here, right?
Sure.
So I went in to see a German car manufacturing the other day, and I mentioned, I've got a 17-year-old Mini still, right?
Yeah.
Which is still under warranty by BMW, which I think is amazing. So I was talking to some of the guys at BMW, and I said to him, it's really interesting. I didn't realize, you've now got, why have you got Toyota on your slides? And they were like, well, we got Toyota on our slides because the Z4 is the same as the Supra. So BMW provided and licensed every component to Toyota, right?
Yeah.
However, they also licensed the mobile app, which is written on Flutter.
Oh, that's cool.
And they've said to Toyota, we will give you 20 years warranty on that mobile app, which means they're going to have to maintain and test the mobile app with the Toyota for the next 2 decades. And the guy turned around to me and said, that's not the problem. The problem is some of the components, some of the ECU components, have come from previous generations of the car, which are up to 8 years old. So therefore, you've got, in essence, 28 years of warranty on this piece of equipment, which is a car.
Continuous responsibility.
And you've got to launch an app. Now, what is an app going to look like in 20 years? Is it going to be a mobile app? Are we even going to have mobile? Is it going to be, the Google glasses, the Apple glasses, and they've got to support that platform for somebody else for that amount of time. And you just think to yourself, there'll be no apps in 20 years, right? Is there even going to be a mobile app?
So to that point, I'm actually a bit of confused, because from one hand, you see a lot of things moving to the watches, right? The watch even becoming a bit bigger with the Apple Watch Ultra. But on the other hand, you look at Samsung and you see the foldables, which are actually becoming bigger, like a smartphone, which becomes a tablet. So is it is technology being consolidated into a smaller viewport, or it's expanding? I'm a bit confused. So I don't know what's going to happen in the next 28 years. I hope that we can have this discussion in 28 years and be smarter. But yeah, definitely technology varies, and it goes to so many different ways. And we see players like Microsoft and Google and obviously Apple kind of leading the way in the digital landscape, at least. And they're playing with different directions. So that's why it's a bit confusing.
You generally don't know. And I must admit, you say about foldables, of course, the Surface foldable, they're going to do a 3, which is going to be 5G. Again, that strange form factor of opening it, not 2 separate screens in essence, right?
Yeah.
You've got a kind of a Windows embedded feel. I know people are running Windows 11 on those devices, right?
Yeah.
So there are all these different kind of embedded Windows for the HoloLens. You've got an Android Samsung derivative for the Oculus and the Oculus Pro, what's going to be launched very soon, which is going to add in mixed reality capabilities on there and eye tracking, which is going to be really interesting. So, we've got all this new future vision coming through,
Right.
and then we've actually got real world application. And that's going to, I know we've only got 10 minutes left here because we were actually both on a panel discussion around performance engineering, but that brings me to my next point. I was driving with Toby Marston, Toby very well. We're driving to the Capgemini campus in the south of France. We're in his X5, and we're, very smooth. He's making a phone call to jump on a Teams call, and the Teams call drops literally every 3 or 4 minutes as we're going through and changing to different beacons. And we couldn't continue that conversation, whether it was video or it was, just audio.
Changing antennas
and it would not make that phone call. For the full 30 minutes, I had to redial him in 15, 20 times. And I just sat there, and he's got a strong 4G, he's got a strong 5G. And it kind of makes me feel that, like, in the real world, the promises that we've been given about actually, 5G, 4G, and stable connectivity over a large period of time for enterprise collaborative platforms like Windows Mesh coming down the line and Teams, it's not really there. And I'm going to do this as a live demo as I possibly can. But, we all love speed tests. I'm sat here. I've got. I'm going to take it off Wi-Fi. So I've got 5G. You can see I've got 5G in the top corner, top right hand corner. So what is my 5G going to really look like, right? So we're going to run this. Am I going to see 100 meg, 150 meg? What was the dream that everyone gave me? Oh, that's looking pretty good. And that's running at, 100 meg, right? So, in this situation, probably the opposite of what we were expecting. There's a bit of jitter on there, right? There's a bit of, the ping's only 197. It's not, which is supposed to be much lower for this. And, we're getting about 60 meg upload, 100 meg. Still very impressive, though.
Which carrier are you using?
This is on AT&T at the moment, right? Okay. So, that gives you a bit of a live demo that with 100 meg a second, I should have a pretty good experience at, connecting to any type of streaming content, maybe even 4K content, right?
Let's wait for a few more weeks for Black Friday, and let's see how your speed test looks like.
I like the fact that you brought Black Friday up, because we just can't seem to get it right when it comes to it, right? We had House of Dragon launch. We talked about this the other day, and then straight away HBO Max went down. We know HBO Max doesn't have their own cloud system, so who went down, right? Who wasn't prepared for this? And I'm now connected to the Wi-Fi in Disneyland, right? So what's your viewpoint on the Disneyland Wi-Fi? Is it going to be better or worse than my Wi-Fi?
Much worse.
Much worse. And why is that? Is that because there's so many people at the conference?
It's a mix of.
Disney's a client, might not be by the end of this conversation, but that's not bad. We're about 18 megs, so again, it's acceptable. It's fine for downloading stuff. Yeah. And with all these people all connected to it in a large conference, you can kind of run that. But the ping's down to 40 milliseconds, right? Yes. So suddenly we're starting to see we've got a larger lead time on the 5G network. But then once it gets it up to speed, it's pretty healthy for 100 megasecond. Right. And we got 20 meg when we're talking about this kind of Wi-Fi connection. Yeah. And we know really we drop a naught off that if we're going to be honest with each other about the actual throughput when we're time slicing, right?
Well, from an end user perspective, he wouldn't care, about these numbers. He would care about, he's going to the retail, to the online store, and he's able to proceed end to end without these disconnections. And, whatever he's trying to do, he's successful. And for that, these guys, we have our colleague, friend Alejandro, right? He's saying you need to start this testing as early as possible. You don't need to wait for the week of Black Friday to do this performance testing and user experience testing. You need to do it throughout the year, okay? Mm-hmm. If you find something a few days before Black Friday, it's hardly impossible for the team to really fix it and do something about it. So you need to be prepared all year for this thing. for these things, and that's the only way to do.
So who's your favorite retailer? Well, let's give them a go and how long it actually takes to be their webpage to load up.
Best Buy or Target.
Let's go for Target. Was it Target.com?
Target.com, yeah.
Target.com. Okay, so Target.com.
My wife works there, so we need to be very careful.
We need to be very careful.
Yeah.
We're going to hit the go button and we're going to count how many seconds, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The screen's up. It's not finished loading. 9, 10, 11. Still going. Still running some JavaScript. 12 seconds. Not a bad. Is it acceptable?
No. No. But they do have a mobile app which might perform a bit better than the browser, but still,
right?
12 seconds. It's way too long.
Yeah, and I did this on our keysite.com website, not to name anybody, but I did it live, and I pulled down the network emulator in the developer plugin, and we got that kind of size of speed, right? And
you can collect like trace viewing of this website and see what actually causes this delay or the refresh, and which elements are the heaviest ones to process. You can really fix these kind of things pretty easy if you just monitor them. So,
and obviously a shout out to Google Lighthouse, right?
Oh, yeah,
which gives you
for
free, and then you've also got the fact that it gives you some of the accessibility stuff, which kind of gets me onto my next kind of question. So obviously you were helping during the pandemic when we were testing the MIT application. The big challenges there, multilingual kind of support, challenges around accessibility,
device kind of legacy, new old devices people were using.
And so in that kind of area, when it's really critical, because something like COVID, right? How do we make sure any person, young and old, can have that same experience through a single application estate, make it simple, and also feel secure that they're able to accessible so that they can take their digital health data and share it, and potentially saves lives. And to me, all those dimensions, especially multilingual testing, is still one of those kind of areas that people don't get as involved in, shall we say.
And I'm still using the example of this path check application from MIT that we actually collaborated with. And what I loved about the one of the findings was that in a different language on a OnePlus Android device, they simply are not displaying the submit button. So you can actually fill everything in the form on the mobile app, but you don't see the login button or the submit button, right? And it was very specific to this device because of the language and the device OS platform. So we found some nice.
We did find some nice stuff, and I know German because also the language typically has longer language kind of letters. That also had the same thing coming off the tearing on the screen. Especially if you're increasing your DPI, higher contrast, you're doing some of those accessibility stuff. The fact you can't even hit the submit button is a bit of a problem. And these frameworks, like I think it's React Native app was right.
Yeah,
that's Facebook,
React.
right? So it's not like it's the first time anyone's used this, but even frameworks like Flutter and from Google and Facebook's React, still have to be tested, right?
Oh yeah.
And I think that's where I guess we should leave it, because I know we've got this next big performance stuff. But have you got any kind of ending tips for us, Iran, about how people could get started and make a difference?
So, as we just discussed, technology continuously evolves. Okay, so one thing is for us practitioners, we shouldn't stand still at any time. Every week, new things are happening, right? If you would ask me 3 months ago something about Cypress, right? I'm a Cypress ambassador, and the main complaint that was against Cypress, they don't support Safari WebKit. Okay, now they support it. Okay? Things are changing, things are advancing. If you go and look at Appium 2.0 is just coming in just a few weeks. It's almost GA, right? And they're going to decouple all drivers, and they're getting a driver for Flutter testing. So for my best advice is be connected to the community, keep learning, because things are changing, and whatever you thought you knew a few months ago is not obsolete, but it's really, you need to refresh yourself every now and then. And by the way, this conference that we are now at, Star West, right? I've seen a lot of the sessions here. I attended your session. tons of innovation, tons of new content and insights that everyone can learn from. And I learn everything every day, from every session, a new thing, and it makes me a better practitioner at the end of the day.
I love it, and keep on learning. As
Exactly.
James Whitaker would always say, do epic stuff. So on that bombshell, keep testing, and thanks so much, Iran, for being on the live stream.
Anytime, my friend. Anytime.
Right.